It's been 38 years since we last spoke. Yes, Parashat Hokat starts 38 years after Parashat Korach. The Torah skips over all the years in which the people toiled in the desert, journeying from one place to another, turning around. In fact, an entire new young generation has been born. And in this parsha, we say goodbye to two of the three great leaders that led the people throughout the desert, both Aaron and Miriam, pass on. And Moshe Rabbeinu, together with Aaron, finds himself in a moment of great challenge, loses his patience, hits the rock, and as a consequence, loses his leadership of the people. Yes, we've known long ago that Moshe Rabbeinu will not be able to take the people into the land. It was already hinted to us 38 years ago in that famous prophecy of Eldad Umedad, Yehoshua met Moshe met Yehoshua machnisam le'eretz Yisrael. Yes, we learned this long ago. Hidden, hinted. Nonetheless, something went terribly wrong in this week's parsha. It is hard to understand how Moshe Rabbeinu, the great leader who has dealt with such extreme patience with the ups and downs of the Jewish people, loses his patience at a moment here where all they really did was ask for water. They were thirsty. And God tells them to fulfill a rather peculiar commandment. He tells them to go to the rock and speak to the rock, and the rock will give him water. But yet Moshe Rabbeinu loses his patience, strikes the rock, and yells at the people, "Listen, you rebellious people! Will God be able to bring you water from this stone?" That act was enough for God to say, "You have given up an opportunity to sanctify me in front of the people, and therefore you will no longer be leaders of these people. You will not merit to enter into the land of Israel." Very difficult to understand the chain of events here. I believe that if we read the Torah text carefully, we will notice that there are a couple of very small hints that give us some insight onto what went wrong here. You see, first we know that this entire episode happens right after Miriam dies. Miriam passes on, and Moshe and Aaron are sitting Shiva over Miriam. And this is when the people have the greatest moments of need. God says to them, you don't have the prerogative of self-indulgence, of having personal mourning right now. The people need you, because the people truly are panicking. We know that the miraculous well of water that accompanied them throughout all the years in the desert vanished with Miriam. And the people were thirsty. They were worried. This is a young generation that grew up in the desert. They weren't sure what was coming up ahead. They needed to be comforted. They needed to be guided. In fact, right before Moshe is told to speak to the stone, he is told to do something rather strange. You see, we didn't pay attention because we don't notice how quickly the years pass by. But Moshe is told to take along with him a prop. A prop that seems to be completely useless, considering his mission. You see, we always envision Moshe Rabbeinu walking around with the staff in his hand. He's walking around with the mateh, he has the rod. But that is not true. This mateh was not in Moshe Rabbeinu's hands all these years. In fact, the last time that we even hear of this mateh is when Moshe turns to Yehoshua and tells him, go battle the nation of Amalek. Yes, all the way back then, before the giving of the Torah. In the great first battle that the Jewish people confronted, Moshe Rabbeinu says to Yehoshua, you go fight, I am going up to the mountain with the staff of God in my hands. And in fact, we know what happened. Moshe Rabbeinu's hands became tired and heavy. He was not even able to keep up his own hands, never mind a staff in them. And Aaron and Hur needed to support his hands from both sides. And the staff was never heard from again. The staff was placed in the tabernacle. It was placed in front of God. And in fact, Moshe Rabbeinu was told clearly by God, take the staff milifnei Elokim, from in front of God. Because this is a staff that is very meaningful. Moshe Rabbeinu, many, many years ago, when you had to strike the stone, when the nation was a young nation coming out of slavery, completely lost in their ways and inadequate in terms of their belief in God, I told you to take the staff that you used to strike the Or, that you used to strike the Nile. Yes, Moshe Rabbeinu, you were perplexed about it back then. And then you understood that what your mission was to recognize that even though you, Moshe Rabbeinu, may have grown leaps and bounds in your understanding and appreciation of my presence, the people have not. These are people that are still very much still standing by the banks of the Nile the first time you appeared to them and showed them the water turning into blood. And they said, whoa, this is a holy man. But do we really understand the power of God, the omnipotent God, the single divine being? Do we understand any of this? Do we appreciate this? Oh no, not yet. We still have a lot to learn. And all the way back then, when the people were thirsty, I told you to take this staff and strike the stone because the people needed this staff to connect them. They did not understand yet how to reach out to God without some kind of physical expression of the power of God. It is only when they finally confronted their battles, when they confronted their hearts in the battle of Amalek, that they understood that all they really needed to do is have their hearts turned to God. And then they were victorious. From that point on, the staff no longer served their purpose. And now, Moshe Rabbeinu, we were looking at a young generation, a lost young generation that grew up in this desert. But they grew up in the presence of God. They feel and understand the presence of God. What they have not yet mastered is how to turn to God in their time of need. They've been terribly spoiled in the desert. Everything was given to them on a silver platter. Everything was ready. You, Moshe Rabbeinu, need to teach them how to call out to God. You have to teach them the power of prayer. This is what the Jewish people do. We were given a gift. We were given a line of communication to God. And the people were supposed to ask. Moshe, take this staff from in front of God and show them. You do not need to retreat all the way back to where your forefathers were. They used to need this staff. You people do not need this. You have the power of speech, the power of prayer. Speak to the rock. Show them how to daven to God. And Hashem will answer your prayers. But Moshe Rabbeinu, as an aging leader, looked at the young generation growing up in the desert, and at a moment of frustration, all he saw was the exact same people. The same rebellious people that he confronted 38 years ago. The same rebellious people that needed a stone to be stricken. And in one moment of anger, instead of sanctifying God and teaching them the power of prayer, he sent this generation decades backwards in their faith. It will take a tremendous amount of effort to rebuild it now. In fact, some say that a true golden opportunity was missed at this very moment. It is expressed immediately after this story by a rather strange monologue. Moshe Rabbeinu is faced with the nation of Edom, the offsprings of Esav, the great nation of Seir. And as opposed to what he does with every other nation that they confront in their journey, instead of just asking to pass by and asking for water and some bread, he starts with a very long monologue telling him, oh, so said your brother Israel, you know what we went through together. We have a common history. And you know the terrible tribulations that happened once we went down to Egypt. And you should know that in Egypt we were slaves. And we were toiling. And we cried out to God. And God brought us out. And here we are on the banks of your border. What is this monologue all about? Some argue that Moshe Rabbeinu thought that this was the moment of the final redemption. Here the Jewish people are, in their glory, ready to enter the promised land. Moshe Rabbeinu had hoped that this was the moment in which the great struggle with Esav can be reconciled. The reign of God's kingdom will finally come to be. He wanted to do this together. He thought for a moment that the great opportunity of uniting Esav with Yaakov is right in front of him. Oh, but the king of Edom replies right away, "Oh, I know all too well what just happened by that stone. You say that you cried out to God. You say that you used the power of prayer in your endeavors in order to be saved. But I saw all too well that when push came to shove, you struck the stone. You haven't changed. You haven't changed one little bit. And if you don't have the ability to stand up to what you were commanded to by our great Father, when He commanded us to each share in the realm where you are supposed to be the one that teaches the world how to reach out to God and pray, then I shall fulfill my destiny, and I shall come out after you by sword, because you are far from being ready." Indeed, Moshe Rabbeinu loses his leadership at this point. He no longer is able to see the people for where they are at this given moment. He cannot be the one that will bring them into a land in which they will have to contend the powers of nature without the miraculous divine gifts from God all around them. Yes, Moshe Rabbeinu would have to put down the staff and end his career. The people will need to learn that when times of great need, of course we need to step up to the plate and take action, but we do so through the power of prayer that vested with us. We don't need any magical rods. We don't need any magical intermediators to connect us to God. God is right here, in our mouths, in our hearts. All we need to do is cry out, and He will quench our thirst in that generation and in every single generation to come. Shabbat Shalom.